Ladies and gentlemen, let me say thank you for your kind invitation to speak to you today and discuss the importance of spirituality for a good life in old age. For decades, the Institute of Gerontology at the University of Heidelberg has been working intensively on the possible influences of spirituality or religiosity on the psychological situation of old people in very different contexts. For example, in analyzing mental development potential in old age, in our understanding, mental development describes an interaction between cognitive, emotional, and motivational processes. We are always engaged in answering the question of to what extent spiritual development will be fostered by mental development. Moreover, we address the potential influence of spirituality or religiosity on mental health in the medical psychological context of coping with severe chronic illnesses, including dementia, or in palliative contexts. At the same time, we are interested in the extent to which vital spirituality or religiosity can enrich or stimulate intergenerational relationships. Against the background of numerous studies in which we look at spirituality or religiosity and summarizing these studies, I would like to state the spiritual dimension must not be underestimated in the importance for shaping life, for openness, for accepting the limits of life or border situations, but also for productively shaping intergenerational relationships. It gains further importance when the person reflects deeply on her or his own vulnerability and finitude. It can contribute to people becoming more involved in the world or for the world, in the sense of Hannah Arendt's amor mundi, even in old age. This involvement can also be seen as an expression of a spiritually motivated instrumental concern for the world or mental concern about the world. It can promote the ability of people to better distance themselves from illness and symptoms of illness, that is, not to let these become the focus of consciousness. Finally, it can help to maintain an inner relationship with a close person if that person has already passed away. I would like to begin my presentation with a prelude in C sharp minor from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Volume 1, by Johann Sebastian Bach. And I would like to finish my presentation with a fugue in C sharp minor that follows the prelude. I have taken the liberty of bringing a recording that we made in January of this year in the old assembly hall of the Ruprecht Karls University in Heidelberg. Why do I want to frame my presentation with a prelude and a fugue by Bach? There are three reasons. First, the prelude is for me the epitome of contemplation and meditation. This makes it ideal for a mental and spiritual process, which I describe with the term introversion with introspection, and which I understand as a developmental potential of old age, also against the background of empirical analysis we had done. This developmental potential forms a central part of the content of my presentation. Second, Johann Sebastian Bach's music is characterized by his spirituality and his religiosity. He ends each of the two volumes of the well-tempered clavier with the synod, SDG, the abbreviation for the Latin Solo Deo Gloria, translated glory to God alone. And third, Bach's fugues express an understanding of the development of the soul or psyche and spirit over the entire course of life. That is very important now, which can be paraphrased as follows. Our individual development is orientated towards the end, which in Latin, finis, can also be translated as destination. The end of life describes the transition of our individual spirit into a world spirit. For example, see the Roman Egyptian philosopher Plotinus. At the end of life, all the significant themes of life condense. And these two aspects are illustrated by Bach with a fugue. A fugue consists of one or more themes that are led through the individual different voices. They must be played in such a way that they are easily audible in the various motifs. At the end of the fugue, in the Engführung or narrowing, all the themes are led through the voices in the shortest possible time, sometimes only 1 or 2 bars, giving the coda of the fugue an unbelievable density. This is a kind of thing Bach envisaged for the end of life. And it's a kind of thing we may well encounter in very old or dying people. So, René Hefti, now I begin with the prelude in C sharp minor. Then my presentation will follow. And after that, I shall finish with the fugue in C sharp minor. A fugue for 5 voices, one of the most complex fugues Bach composed. Please start. Please let me continue with the differentiation between spirituality and religiosity. I understand spirituality here also following a broad body of theoretical literature as an increasing awareness of one's own mind, as a form of expression of one's mind, as becoming part of a spiritual world, as transcendence. I understand religiosity as an explicit reference to a codified belief system, to a faith community. Furthermore, I understand it as a sharing of rites and rituals with members of the faith community. This differentiation is considered significant, very significant, by old people because most of them understand spiritual and existential aging as a process of increasing individualization of the mind, whereby it is also considered that this individual mind will broaden or pour itself out into the supra-individual spiritual upon death. Please allow me to address another aspect that seems significant to me with regard to spirituality. In our empirical as well as anthropological analysis of old age, that means 9th and 10th or 11th decade of life, we are more and more concerned with the question of how to conceptualize the spirit. Spirit is more than cognition. If you follow Aristotle's conception, then the body is, as it were, an organ of the soul, of the spirit, whereby organ is meant metaphorically here. I would like to mention two considerations that we make again and again in our research, triggered by empirical phenomena that seem significant to us, but which cannot be classified in conventional categories or category systems. The first phenomenon we describe against the background of numerous studies at the Institute, introversion with introspection, associated with openness as a potential of old age. Introversion, that means old people concentrate more and more on the psychic flow, in order to introduce a term which had been created by Henri Bergson, the psychic flow of events in the self. They experience the self clearly. Introspection, from this growing awareness of the self, deep insights arise that concern life. And from this it follows, comprehensive life knowledge is growing. Openness. This describes emotional, or as we call it or circumscribe it, cathartic flexibility to cosmic processes. Against this background, the interaction of introversion, introspection, and openness, one can certainly say a new spiritual quality becomes visible in old age, which has a close relationship to spirituality. And the second phenomenon, in dementia patients, which we analyze in detail, even in advanced stages, we can repeatedly recognize, albeit very brief, phases in which the patients respond to the gaze of those close to them, in which they show a clearly increased lucidity. The mental quality, defined in a comprehensive sense, is something that clearly goes beyond cognitive processes. As already emphasized, emotional and motivational processes also play a major role here. Above all, this mental quality is expressed in all physical behavior and actions. The body as a medium of expression of the mind. See, for example, the work of the philosopher and psychiatrist Karl Jaspers. And these aspects must be taken into account when talking about spirituality and religiosity. Ladies and gentlemen, the assessment of spirituality and religiosity is often carried out by means of psychometric instruments, which mostly prove to be suitable for validly and reliably recording different aspects of spirituality or religiosity. These instruments have proven very useful in both gerontological and palliative care contexts. At the Heidelberg Institute of Gerontology, we are currently focusing more on data from semi-structured interviews to capture spirituality or religiosity from an individual perspective. We are not doing this because we would question the value of psychometric instruments, no, but because we are currently concerned with capturing the diversity of spiritual and religious expressions in biographical development, and because we would like to answer the question of the extent to which an individual's living conditions influence the intensity or depth and expression of spirituality or religiosity. At present, we can rely particularly on two studies, in each of which we interviewed 400 people over the age of 75 in detail, and which also, but not only, dealt with the question of what significance spirituality or religiosity, that means a faith in God, take on in the experience of old people. How old people actively experience spirituality or religiosity, and to what extent it forms an aid in shaping their lives, as well as in coping with heavy losses or border situations. In doing so, we have made a thematic analysis of personality in our research, which has a prominent position in dynamic personality theory. To briefly, only very briefly, explain the corresponding method, you give interview partners the opportunity to answer some central questions. We also speak of anchor questions in as much detail as possible, and to illustrate the contents addressed with the richest possible biographical material. From answers given to the central questions, most interviews are conducted by at least two interviewers, now try to reconstruct life themes of the individual. These are those themes that the individual spontaneously addresses, describes, and explains in describing different areas of life. In a second step, the interviewers compare the themes they identified in the interview. In so doing, we were able to find a high degree of agreement between the interviewer evaluations. If we take the two studies together, they show a correlation of 0.89. In cases where interviewers do not reach concordant evaluations, the possible reasons for the lack of agreement are discussed together. Then the interviewers settle on the list of life issues that can be taken as given in an individual. Now
may I do a short question? Because I'm following you quite right, and I think it's very fascinating. Some people think that you would also show slides, but I don't think you do, is it?
I do not have slides with me.
No.
That is my mistake, yes.
I don't think it is a mistake. I think it is very original, authentic, and please go ahead. But that's an answer to a few people who are used to slides anyway. But
Yeah.
just go ahead. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for this interruption. When I passed the 60th birthday, I decided no longer to show slides. In some sense, that may be the rigidity of old age, but sometimes it may be a symptom for openness in old age, yes. But thank you so much that you have interrupted me, and in order to address this question, because it's very important. But I do not have slides with me, but in case you are interested to get the manuscript, of course you will get it. Yeah, thank you. Now I come to 10 more general statements that seem significant in the context of spirituality or religiosity. And in doing this, I refer to both studies. First, let me start with what we call vulnerability. The significantly increased susceptibility to illness in old age, that is in the 9th, 10th or 11th years of life, decades of life, which has been repeatedly proven in gerontology and geriatrics, is also very clearly reflected in the experience of old people, vulnerability, physical or cognitive or emotional vulnerability. A significant proportion of the study participants in both studies referred in detail to sensory and motor losses, chronic causes of illness, and limitations in independence. And they characterize these in a differentiated manner. While the proportion of these study participants in the 75 to 80 years age group was still comparatively low, about 25 to 30%, it increased significantly in the 80 to 85 age group, but especially in the group of 85-year-olds. In the latter group, it was over 90%. With increasing age, there were also differentiated losses in cognitive performance, whereby the intensity of the reported losses varied considerably from person to person. Second, how was vulnerability experienced? How did people try to process or to cope with it? Here it first became clear that a large proportion of the study participants explicitly spoke of higher or high demands that old age places on the psyche, or in modern terminology, on the self, demands, psychological demands. However, they did not simply speak of stresses or burdensome situations that one is exposed to in old age, but rather of the high demands that old age places on one. This differentiation seems essential to me. For if we lay emphasis on the demands, the psychological task of processes and coping with them is expressed at the same time. And not only the task, but also the possibility of being effective. It's very important, of being effective in doing so. We found comparatively few old people from whom we had the impression that they would give up under the multitude of burdens. Even when we encountered such persons, 15 to 20% in each of the two studies, we were able to recognize in the vast majority the strong motive to make a specific effort to cope with the demands. Third, in the process, we first recognized that a significantly larger proportion of old people succeed in reflecting, using, and integrating the positive aspects of their life situation into their life evaluation. And this in addition to the demands. Emotionally deep relationships, areas of interest, nature, ethics, spirituality, religiosity, commitment to other people are the sources of these positive experiences. One must not underestimate these positive aspects. As Lawton puts it, these commitments to life in their importance for an overall positive evaluation of life. The thematic analysis showed us clearly in the rare cases, only demands or stressful situations are mentioned. Much more frequently, demands and positive commitments to life are mentioned simultaneously. Only if this coincidence is noticeably diminished or no longer recognizable can the danger of more or less pronounced mental disorders be assumed. Fourth, it was not only the life commitments, but also the subjectively experienced inner processes that were perceived by old people as strengths, as resources, as potentials, developmental potentials of old age, and were reported in a highly differentiated way. These internal or these inner processes, which many old people described in such detail that we also assume this to be a life topic or a life theme, included on the one hand aspects such as growing overview of individual areas of life, greater inner peace, the more intensive experience of relationships with other people, growing openness to new experiences as well as to new areas of the external and internal world, greater gratitude for life, finally a deeper insight into the self, also into the differentiated nature of one's own self. These inner processes, if they can be presented in a differentiated way and illustrated by personal experiences, can certainly be described in terms of maturity, for example, in the sense of Erickson's epigenetic diagram. Fifth, life commitments, as well as processes of mental and spiritual maturation, helps the individual to better cope with experiences of vulnerability. In the life thematic structures of the participants in the study, it was clear that in the description of the processing of vulnerability, indications were also given of what binds one to life or of the inner richness of the soul, of the spirit. Here in particular, spirituality or religiosity were also mentioned as significant, very significant characteristics. Six, in order for soul spiritual maturing processes to be triggered or to continue in experiences of vulnerability, one experience is decisive, namely the experience of being needed by other people, for example, by a faith community, of having a task in life. See, for example, the work of Viktor Frankl, which takes a lot of influence on our empirical work, of being able to put one's life at the service of other people or of humanity or the world. We have paraphrased this with the concept of inner, that means cognitive, emotional, or mental, and outer, that means instrumental or practical care for other people, whereby the concept of care, here following Martin Heidegger, Hannah Arendt, Albert Camus, but above all, Emmanuel Levinas, has an explicitly positive, not negative, positive connotation. It is not about melancholy toned care, depressive care, but about creative, productive care that is not aimed at one's own person, but explicitly at the person of the other. See, for example, the work of Emmanuel Levinas. Our analysis showed statistically close correlations. That is one of the most prominent empirical results. Statistically close correlations between the experienced and realized care on the one hand, and central psychological constructs such as life satisfaction, depressiveness, low depression, sense of coherence, and subjective health on the other. It can certainly be stated that experienced and realized care forms a pivotal basis or precondition for maintaining mental health, which in turn is also reflected in diverse life relationships and in inner processes that are experienced as fruitful. Seventh, this concern often expresses a spiritual or religious motive. The concern, can I do a lot for other people? Can I realize a creative, productive form of care? I place myself at the service of the world because I believe in spiritual principle, because I believe in the divine, because I believe in God, because I want to set a spiritual or religious example in the world, even into future, very important, even into future generations, what we have circumscribed with the term of generativity, following Erik Homburger-Eriksson. Here the concept of the polyphony of the spirit, used by the Heidelberg theologian Michael Welker, is helpful. The spirit, in his words, and also in my personal words, God's spirit, can make itself felt in the most diverse ways. Eighth, it is now important that society and culture, and here explicitly also faith communities, for example, church, faith communities, develop the ability and willingness to perceive, take seriously, acknowledge, and help realize this motive of care in old age. This striving of old people for generativity and symbolic immortality, which must not be interpreted in the sense of a narcissistic immortality. No. It's only a symbolic immortality, a term which has been introduced by Hannah Arendt. Opportunity structures must be created, for example, in the room of the church, to offer possibilities for the realization of the caring, of the productive, of the service motive. Differentiated collective representations of old age must be culturally communicated to sensitize all people to this spiritual or religious dimension of old age. Ninth, this would be an important task for the faith communities or churches, which can act as important drivers for intergenerationally conceived opportunity structures, intergenerationally, with the idea and the guiding concept of the faith community. Furthermore, this would be an important task for our society and culture in general which could deal with the strengths as well as the weaknesses of old age in a much more differentiated way, and in this way contribute to the changed way of dealing with experiences of vulnerability in our society. And tenth, one of the great challenges will now be, and we are also facing this challenge in our studies, to arrive at a profoundly changed view of people suffering from dementia. Namely, in the sense that we ask to what extent we can also recognize, or perhaps better sense or feel, a spiritual or religious dimension in them. To what extent you can also observe motives of creative care in them, even if these are only slightly pronounced. To what extent you can contribute through spiritual and religious accompaniment to maintaining their life connection and quality of life. We are just beginning, and we make a lot of research on dementia. We are just beginning with the corresponding research, but we also see significant potential here for a more comprehensively conceived understanding of the person. I think that is a very important future task. For example, for faith communities, for churches, for science, and for practice. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to introduce shortly two theoretical perspectives from the psychological discipline that seem essential to me with regard to deeper understanding of spirituality. I'm convinced that these perspectives can have a lasting influence and fertilize further research on the meaning of spirituality or religiosity for older people. The first considers spirituality in the context of biographical reports and self-narratives. The second, an existential psychological theory, considers central indications of spirituality in the value structure of human beings and works out that the task character of life is also owed to experienced and lived spirituality or religiosity. The first, a narrative perspective of self-understanding and ethics. Explaining the idea of narrative identity, the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur argues that what we call knowledge about the self or self-identity is not discovered in the world outside, but reconfigured. In order to quote him, self-understanding is an interpretation of the self, in turn, finds in the narrative, among other signs and symbolic, a privileged form of mediation. The Canadian philosopher and political scientist Charles Taylor, in his book Philosophy and the Human Sciences, points out that self-narration must always be orientated towards events, the significance of which, however, does not exist independently of the person narrating, and which, in addition, is changed by the narration itself. In order to quote him, our attempts to formulate what we hold important must, like descriptions, strive to be faithful to something. But what they strive to be faithful to is not an independent object, but rather a largely inarticulated sense of what is of decisive importance. An articulation of this object tends to make it something different from what it was before. Quotation ended. Following Charles Taylor, the self-interpretations increase in significance when considering self-definition. It's the beginning of a very nice essay on spirituality and ethics at the end of life. The general internist and philosopher Daniel Salmasi, who influenced our work heavily, from the Georgetown University in 2013, quotes an aphorism from Aristotle's Poetics. I quote, "Every ethos implies a mythos," quotation ended. Whereas the original meaning intended by Aristotle was that dramatic work, character development ethos, requires a plot, mythos. Salmasi puts forward the thesis that every system, it's important for us, every system of ethics depends, either implicitly or explicitly, on some very fundamental biographical story about some very basic questions, such as the nature of the universe, the meaning of the human, the nature of value, the purposes or the lack of human freedom, and others. Implying, to quote him, that our fundamental self-identifying and morally originating commitments regarding the most profound questions that all human beings must face, questions that lurk always beneath the surface of medical practice, inform our attitudes and shape our actions in the work we do in caring for those who are very old or who are dying. Respective narratives might be seldom told in everyday life, but particularly in the context of palliative care, they regularly come closer to the surface. Treatment preferences and decisions are implicitly or explicitly based on very strong evaluations, giving answers to the questions like, where did I come from? Where am I going? How am I to live? Here, many patients, relatives, caregivers, and practitioners explicitly refer to spiritual or religious belief, and others may refer to what Taylor, for example, called imminent transcendence, that is, a belief in something that transcends the person and his or her needs and preferences, but is circumscribed by the bounds of society, of course, or humankind, or the world of the universe, and is not supernatural in the sense of being beyond nature. And the second theory, self-actualization. A differentiated review of one's own life, and at the end of the composed and hopeful view of one's own vulnerability and finitude, is significant for a constructive life in old age. We circumscribe it as, or describe it as, life review, for example, in the terminology of Robert Butler in the 60s. And it is significant for a constructive life, not only in old age, but also in dying patients. Constructive here means that the self can express and communicate itself, that it can even differentiate further. The respective processes are referred to as self-actualization. According to the German and US American neurologist and psychologist Kurt Goldstein, who coined the term of self-actualization, there is, to quote him, only one motive by which human activity is set going, the tendency to actualize oneself. This idea can be traced back to the writings of Spinoza, who understood development as becoming what one has intended to be and nothing other than that, no matter how exalted the alternative might appear to be. In my understanding, The term of self-actualization describes the realization of values, capabilities, tendencies, and needs, and the consistency of the situation experienced in this process. Here, the statement that the person comprises many different types of quality is important for an appropriate understanding of self-actualization. In an approximate differentiation, we can distinguish, for example, between physical, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, religious, perception-related, or social communicative, aesthetic, and the everyday practical qualities. And each of these qualities alone can already form the source of a self-actualization. In the language of the existence psychology of Viktor Frankl, self-actualization is to be understood as a striving of mankind for the development of values. Viktor Frankl differentiates between three fundamental value forms in which our comprehensive understanding of a person and their possibilities for development of values are expressed. The homo faber, as a creating person. The homo amans, as a loving, experiencing, perceiving person. And the homo patiens, as a suffering, enduring person who accepts the suffering. Worthy of mention in Frankl's theory is the statement according to which self-actualization generally is possible. And Frankl goes so far as to say that this is possible in particular in limit or in border situations. In the realization of adjustment, values, meaning, the capability of achieving a new attitude to life in a limit situation, Frankl even sees the highest form of value realization. Yes, I have cited these two theoretical perspectives because they seem to me to be particularly essential for thematic analysis of the experience of old people, but also of dying people. In what way? We were able to show in the two aforementioned samples of 400 interviewed persons each, as well as in a study on the support of tumor patients at the end of their lives, that the variety of topics can certainly be grouped around the three value structures differentiated by Viktor Frankl. I understand these personally significant topics as a form of self-actualization. What is important now, and that is my last aspect, is that the telling of stories, of biographically anchored stories, is tied to the presence of people who can and who want to listen. Listening here means to understand these stories in their concrete as well as in their symbolic content, and to recognize the messages lying behind the concrete. If the storyteller realizes that the listener is dealing with the biographical narratives in this way, then a significant basis for growing self-actualization is created. And it is only in this self-actualization that spiritual and religious themes are addressed and explained. Direct questioning about spirituality and religiosity should be accompanied by the possibility of talking about personally significant topics in as free and concrete a way as possible. As the internationally renowned Heidelberg theologian Dietrich Ritschl has pointed out in his important contributions to the story concept, personally significant concerns or themes are expressed in stories. A, when the themes contain highly significant turning points of the biography, and B, when there is deep trust in the moral integrity of the communication partner. What we have learned in studies of the psychological situations in old age and at the end of life is that conversation about spirituality and religiosity presupposes a high degree of emotional intimacy. If this is given, then corresponding content can be actualized much more readily. My conclusion. And I will come to the next movement of Bach. This process of self-actualization can also be initiated with music and taken further and deeper with conversation about music. Thus, in the middle of individual interviews with old people, with people at the end of life, I sometimes have played Johann Sebastian Bach, usually a prelude and a fugue. One of the most impressive fugues is the mentioned fugue in C-sharp minor from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Volume 1, which I mentioned at the start of my presentation. It is impressive not only because of its wonderful music. There are two other reasons. The first reason is that musicologists repeatedly point out that this fugue reflects the Trinity. The first opening theme is the suffering Christ. The second, the living Spirit. And the third, God's Word, the Logos. And the second reason is the incredible concentration and compression of the voices at the end of the fugue. We can observe this concentration and condensation of themes, values, and concerns, not infrequently in old age, not infrequently at the end of life. If we listen carefully, if we allow ourselves to be touched by the face of the other, as Emmanuel Levinas expressed it. Let us now listen to the fugue in C-sharp minor, but first of all, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, which I greatly appreciate. Rini Helfti, please start with the fugue.
Thank you, Andreas. This was really, really very beautiful, skilled, and your interpretation, I think, was very, very deep, and people appreciate it. I see in the chat. We have only 1 minute left, but there are 2 questions that perhaps can be briefly addressed. René, is that all right?
Yep.
And perhaps, Andreas, you may have noted the questions because they have been written down in the chat. The first is by Arndt Bussing, and the second question is by Martina Nuremberg, both fellow Germans, I think. But if you can directly ask the question again, Arndt, to Andreas, is that possible? And later on, Martina. And please, a short question and a short answer.
Okay. Short question. In our and other studies, we're from the same country, the topic of religious trust or spiritual needs or religious needs was not spontaneously predominant or of relevance. Does it require a biographical, let's say, discovery approach to remember this resource? So it means that different methods, of course, will get some different answers.
I think that is thank you so much. That is a very important or significant statement, not only a question. Because yes, I think so. It is necessary to take a biographical perspective. That means to give the individual the chance, the opportunity to speak in detail about biographical experiences, significant others, some forms of practiced spirituality and religiousness or religiosity, because only, I think, the aspect of spirituality or religiosity will only realize in the sense of the actual genesis, will only realize if you have the possibility to concentrate on very concrete experiences, events, meetings of high emotional intimacy in your biography. And if you give the individual the possibility to give him or her the chance to speak about them, then you will see that you can go beyond the surface, and beyond the surface, that means you can go into the deeper areas or in the deeper levels of the consciousness, and then you will see that you will come to a more better understanding of spirituality and religiosity, and you will trigger the trust in you, because very often we have learned that people say to us, I do not know how to express verbally and non-verbally spirituality and religiosity. That is why it is really necessary to make strong this biographical approach. You are totally right. Thank you so much for interpreting it this way.
Thank you, Andreas. It is very recognizable from other research that unless you start about it and open the relationship, then you can start about this intimate area of life, which is fascinating. The second question is by Martina Nuremberg. Are you in the company? And can you make yourself visible?
Sorry, is it possible to repeat again?
Martina Nuremberg, she had the other question.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Otherwise, it is in the chat.
Okay.
Where do we have it?
Read it.
She wrote it down. Are you there already, Martina?
Yeah. I have read it. Thank you so much.
Okay, you have read it. Okay, that's it.
Martina. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, because that is one of our central motives in our institute, not only to make a research on age and aging, but also to contribute with our research to a totally different understanding of old age. And you think, yes, you are totally right. If you are focusing on the reciprocity of received help or support and given help or support, that means this reciprocity. If you are concentrating or focusing on it, then you will make older people able to actualize their developmental potentials, which are also very significant for the society and culture. And you will foster them, you will motivate them to engage in society. And in case they have the possibility to engage in and to engage for society, I think the spiritual and religious dimension can express itself, because expression of spirituality and religiosity means very often to be highly concrete. And for example, to answer the question, why are you engaged in caring for other people, in doing or in making services for other people? And then very often in continuing the biographical dialogue, very often you will hear, I think, in some sense, that is also a spiritual task, a spiritual demand, because for the reason of symbolic immortality. Yes, you are totally right. We must come to a much more differentiated understanding of old age. And I think, and very often I address with this proposal to our churches, I think that churches, or that the faith communities and theologians, have a very high potential to contribute to this highly differentiated perspective of age and aging in our society and culture. Absolutely, yes.